Hi everyone. Today we have a special guest speaker, Ruben Navarrette, and he's going to give us some insight on politics and the election. Ruben, feel free to introduce yourself.
Yes, I've been covering politics as a journalist for longer than you've been alive, for 35 years. Since I was about your age, I published my first piece as a freelance op-ed in the Los Angeles Times when I was 21. I was still in college at the time. And I'd gone to college to Harvard with the intention of becoming a lawyer, but I liked the idea of writing so much that I kept writing more and more for newspapers, ended up writing a book at a young age about my experience in college when I was still in my 20s. Hosted radio shows in a number of markets, wrote for magazines, wrote op-eds for a number of newspapers, hundreds and hundreds of them. And then got a chance to be syndicated right about 31 or so with the Washington Post Writers Group, where I stayed for 24 years. And then now most recently, I've switched over to Creator Syndicate, which is a big syndicate based in Los Angeles. I am a nationally syndicated columnist. I do video commentary. I do a podcast called Ruben in the Center. I speak around the country and often to college campuses and young people. And now and then I'm asked to talk about politics and to explain this crazy, wacky world of politics that people are, tuning into at least every 4 years or so. So that's what I do.
What brought you to politics? What made you want to go into writing about?
That's a good question. So as young as 15 or so, I remember, in high school and maybe even junior high school, um, enjoying sort of the contrast of two parties and one party saying we believe in this, another party saying we believe in this, and there were actually different parties back then. Now there's a lot more similarities on many issues where the Republicans and Democrats agree, but back then there was a real contrast. And I remember just liking even then the idea that there could be these competing approaches, and they're putting themselves on the table, saying which one do you like better? Whether the issue is education or drug policy or crime or whatever, trade, immigration, the economy. Here are two different approaches. Pick the one you like better. And so, even though I come from a family of Democrats, most Mexican Americans, my community are made up of Democrats. Democrats, Latinos in America, we register Democratic 2-1. Um, we're also conservative Democrats, so there's a short walk to vote to the Republican Party. So in my lifetime, I've voted for Republicans and Democrats alike for president, and usually approach the political process from the middle. So that's why my podcast is called Ruben in the Center.
Wow,
And I
so
got
more
interested
of a
to answer
moderate
your question.
approach.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. What I think got me interested in politics, as I said, was the contrast. What sometimes turns me off from politics is the fact that there's so many negative traits related to it. There's dishonesty, there's hypocrisy,
Mhm.
there's a tendency not to tell voters the whole story. There's situational ethics where the Republicans are arguing one thing on Monday, a different thing on Friday. The Democrats have also shifted their position from Monday to Friday. Let me give you one example.
Okay.
If
Mhm.
you're the Democratic Party and you take the position that the presidency is really the supreme power and that the president can use their executive power, to tackle major issues, well, it's probably the case that the person in the White House is a Democrat. So as long as your party controls the White House, you're going to take that view. The
Mhm.
Republicans are going to take the opposite view. They're going to say that a president is not a king. A president can't act, you know, um, excessively in executive power, and that's why the courts are there and Congress is there to act as checks and balances. That's true on Monday. If on Friday we have a different scenario whereby everything has changed and now the Republicans are running the White House, they're going to shift their argument. Suddenly, they're going to forget what they said on Monday. They're going to take a different position and say, well, now that we control the White House, we believe that, the White House is a supreme power and they should be able to use the executive power to tackle all these problems. Suddenly, the Democrats are saying, hey, wait a minute, the president's not a king. I mean, you cover this for 35 years. And after a while, your head spins and you think, isn't anybody telling the truth? Isn't anybody being consistent? Isn't anybody being honest? Everybody's mainly interested in being reelected and doing whatever it takes to get reelected. So that's kind of the downside to politics.
So basically, people change their stance based on what benefits their views.
What benefits the reelection?
Oh, okay, the reelection.
So if you get elected to Congress, for instance, and if you get into politics, the action is usually at the local level, right? The
Hmm.
city council, the school board, the mayor, the board of supervisors in your local county. That's where stuff really gets done. As you go higher up the ladder, it's more prestigious to work in the state legislature and then ultimately into Congress. But as you go up in prestige, you go down in effectiveness. Because ironically and paradoxically, you have a bigger title next to your name because you're a member of Congress, only 435 members of Congress. Um, but you have less power than you did when you were on the city council, and you could actually get things done.
Yeah.
So I think people at Congress, it becomes pretty much a reelection issue. They get paid over $180,000 a year to work fewer than 170 days a year. They get free medical, for life. They get a pension after their fifth year, which is a six-figure pension for the rest of their life. It's
Wow.
a good gig. It's a really good gig if you can get it. And so they will do anything they can to keep it. And unfortunately, that means sometimes lying and sometimes changing their positions and sometimes turning themselves inside out. You'd be surprised what politicians will do to keep their job.
Yes, I've heard that to make it up to those levels, you have to be pretty corrupt.
Corrupt and really not
Mhm.
married to any set of hard principles. They begin to make compromises. My favorite example, they go to these great law schools like Harvard and Yale and Stanford. It's supposed to be really smart. They come to an issue and all of a sudden they forget everything they've learned as a lawyer and they do things that are patently illegal, you know? And you begin
Wow.
to think exactly, how does this work? It's not that they became less intelligent. They don't know the law. They know the law fine, but politics is so powerful. It corrupts the individual. And
Hmm.
so I have my friends who are Democrats who are really smart, except when they're talking about Republicans. And I have my friends who are Republicans who are really smart, except when they're talking about Democrats.
Yep, I've seen this on both sides,
It's,
definitely.
it's clear when I'm listening to each of them that they're only telling me half the story, the half that makes their party look good.
Wow. Well, then I have some questions about the election. This will be
Mm.
interesting to see your perspective. My first question is, if you could give advice to voters out there who are confused about misinformation, what would you say?
Take in lots of different sources of information.
Hmm.
I think misinformation would be a problem if you only took in one source and that was incorrect. If you said, well, I'm not going to watch the news, I'm just going to turn the daily, show, or I'm going to, go to TikTok or wherever. The problem isn't that the problem isn't where you're going. The problem is that you're not going to enough different places.
Okay.
Information is much more dangerous if it's in the one item that you're consuming. Like
Hmm.
I only get my news from one place and that's corrupted. Okay, now we're in trouble. But if you survey the landscape and you tune into the liberal perspective at MSNBC and the conservative perspective at Fox News and all sorts of things in the middle, the more you consume, I think the less harm misinformation will do to you.
Okay. That makes sense. Yes, I see in both parties where some people only watch from one source, so that can definitely cause issues of
Makes it easier. It makes it easier. I mean, I understand the impulse. I'm working on a column right now for next week
misinformation.
that's going to be a little different. And it basically is like my happiest friends, the friends I associate with at parties, like Halloween parties,
Hmm.
who are happiest are the ones who don't watch the news,
Yep.
right? They're happy. They don't watch the news. They do the exact opposite of what I said. They don't listen to talk radio. They don't listen to podcasts. They don't read the paper. They don't watch the news. And they just go through life happy because the news is so depressing and there's so much corruption and dishonesty in it.
Hmm.
Then the second group of people that seem to be to me very happy are the people who are locked in as Republicans and the people who are locked in as Democrats.
Hmm.
And this election, I'm hearing from both. I'm hearing from the people who are over the moon for Kamala Harris and would never vote for Donald Trump. And then I'm hearing from the opposite group, which is the folks who are over the moon for Donald Trump and would never vote for Kamala Harris. And when I listen to them, they seem pretty happy because they've got it all figured out. It's the world is really black and white. It's really pretty clear. And so the super happy people are the ones who turn off all the news. The second happiest group is the next happiest group are people who are in their own silo. And then there's me. And I'm in the least happy group. I'm in the unhappy group. And the unhappy group is the one that the more information I take in, the more confused I get,
Hmm.
the more
Yep.
frustrated I get. Um, it's not a question of being a low information voter. It's you're a high information voter. And I really feel that if I spend my days trying to understand both the Trump perspective and the Harris perspective, I may be 1% of Americans who do that, and I have a headache. My trouble is I have a headache, right? So now I get why people don't do that.
I can definitely relate. Seeing both sides, and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm hearing opposite things from both sides. Someone is lying.
Someone is lying, and probably both
Mhm.
camps are lying.
Yeah.
10% of Americans in this election are undecided. And by the by, young people make up a big group of that pie. We're seeing three groups of people who previously would have been in the Democratic column who are now undecided. And it's Latinos, African Americans, and young people. And they are people who peeled off from the Democratic Party. They are not going to vote for Donald Trump, but they have not yet been convinced to vote for Harris. And so they're in that undecided group. And a lot of young people, 18 to 28, fall in that category.
Wow. Hopefully we don't get cut off in the next question, but the next question I have is, what do you think the economy would look like with both candidates running? Which candidate would improve affordability for the future generations, in your perspective?
It's a good question. I think there are aspects of Trump economics that make sense and that, we've already seen that in action. I think that his emphasis on cutting taxes tends to bolster the economy, but he also supports something like tariffs on foreign goods from China, which he's tried before. They resulted in a trade war. They're not good for business. They're not very Republican-like in the nature of tariffs. So I'm tempted to say that Trump is somebody who made a lot of his own money as a successful businessman.
Hmm.
Also, he doesn't really understand economics as well as he could or should. But then I have Harris, who ultimately is a bit of an enigma. I think if she were right down the line of like a Bernie Sanders type left-wing Democrat, the way that some Republicans portray her, if she was really that person, we would have reason to worry because those people typically don't know how to run the economy. Um, she's much more of a pragmatist. At the end of the day, Kamala Harris will do what's good for Kamala Harris.
Okay.
She's
See.
not she's not married to any ideology. She's a lot like Trump in that regard. They have that in common. They're going to do their own thing, and what they worry about is succeeding and surviving in politics.
So not about the country, just their self-preservation.
Yeah, yeah, and they rationalize it to say, well, the only way I can help the country is if I stay in office, and if I'm run out of office, if I don't serve, more than one term, I'm not going to be able to accomplish everything I want to accomplish. So that's how they rationalize it. They want to keep this job. It's a good gig. They want to keep it for as long as they can.
Wow, that sounds tricky.
Mm.
So it sounds like in terms of the economy, what you were saying is for Trump, it would get better in some ways, but the tariffs on goods from China could cause issues. And for Kamala, she keeps changing her stance, so it's sort of unpredictable of what would happen.
That's exactly right. It is unpredictable. I think that Harris has less of a grasp on economic policy to begin with, and
Hmm.
she's much more malleable. I think that she would like to help people in the middle class. Um, I don't think she knows how to do that. The hope is that both of these people would surround themselves with good quality folks who would understand the economy better.
Hmm.
Certainly, Americans are most concerned with inflation, the price of groceries and price of everything. It's the number one issue facing the country, and certainly a lot of people um, have their concerns about it. I don't think either of the two major candidates understand how to beat inflation. But as I said, they have their ideas. Here's what makes it very challenging.
Hmm.
Remember what I said back in the old days when I was in junior high school, back in the very early 1980s, you know, when to give you a sense, when Ronald Reagan was elected the first time in 1980, I was in junior high school. Um, Back then, as I said, the Republicans believed in one thing, Democrats believed in another, and you could argue it out and say, well, this is better, this is worse, but at least they kind of put their stake in the ground. There were very few issues on which they agreed. Some would say that's a bad thing to have parties. Why can't they agree on something? Why can't they come together? Well, now we see the alternative, which is parties that often do agree and have the same policy on immigration. Um, the Biden-Harris administration basically photocopied a lot of the Trump initiatives. It's always interesting to hear them beat up on Trump for, closing the border or ending asylum or deporting so many people when they're doing the same thing.
Oh
And
wow.
again, on tariffs, one of the reasons that I think I have this right, the Teamsters Union, one of the major unions,
Hmm.
for the first time decided not to endorse anybody in this election because the membership, overwhelmingly supports Trump and some of it supports Harris. The very fact that a Republican is getting such support from labor unions is directly tied to the fact that Trump proposes things like tariffs. So when Joe Biden comes in, so here comes Trump, he puts in these tariffs on first he starts off with aluminum and steel, and then he extends it to other products. The Chinese retaliate and say, well, if you're going to put a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel, we're going to put a tariff on things that we export. And so it ends up in this ugly war. When Joe Biden gets elected president, he doesn't take the tariffs down. He keeps the tariffs. He
Oh,
preserves them. He preserves them. So the labor unions say, "Wow, we like them both. We like both these candidates because they're both pushing tariffs." Well, now I'm an opponent of tariffs. Where does that leave me? That doesn't leave me with anybody because they basically agree. So it's wild for me to think that 40 years ago, 44 years ago, when I was in junior high school, there used to be two parties, and now there isn't.
there aren't two parties anymore?
There aren't two parties anymore. The
Oh
two
my
parties at
goodness.
one point became very much like Visa and MasterCard. They're just hard to tell them apart. And on immigration, they have the same policies. On trade, they have the same policies. They both say they want to go after inflation. Um, Joe Biden, who was a Democratic president, had when he was in Congress as a senator, he wrote the crime bill, the 1994 crime bill, with the help of police unions that was supported by Republicans. And so every time, ironically, you have somebody who can point to working with the other side, quote, our first
Mhm.
instinct is always to applaud that. But, oh, yeah, we like that they're working together. But if they do that too often on too many issues, you only have one party. Like, where'd the other party go? Right? I mean,
Mhm.
so this party supports tax cuts, this one does too. Um,
So it's
and there,
basically an illusion of division and two parties disguised, or no, one party disguised as two parties.
there's an illusion of division because it helps with fundraising.
Hmm.
Nobody's going to send money to the Democrats if they say, send us money, we're just like the Republicans. Nobody's going to send money to the Republicans if they say, send us money, we're just like the Democrats.
Oh my goodness.
But when you get into the guts of a lot of these issues, they're very similar. And let me give you another example. Let me give you an example. So it's always better to tell a story. So when George W. Bush, 43, he came to Washington from Texas, he had in mind one issue above all others that he was focused on. That's education. That was his big issue. His wife, Laura Bush, is a librarian, a teacher, and he recognized education was the most important issue, K through 12. So he helped push through Congress something called No Child Left Behind, that all the teachers' unions hated. Okay. And it had things like attempts to hold school districts accountable. It separated the data as to how students were doing by race. You could see how well Latino kids were scoring, or Black kids, or white kids. And it was a very divisive bill in the best sense of the word, in that you really got a sense for the protected interests and the people who didn't want that information to get out. You had the NAACP in favor of it, the Congressional Black Caucus against it. You had the National Council of La Raza in favor of it, and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus against it. It was really kind of interesting bill. And the same teachers unions that hated that bill then turned around and voted for Barack Obama. And they helped Barack Obama get elected in 2008. So Barack Obama comes in. He's from Chicago, community organizer, understands the power of education, understands that lots of Black parents feel like their kids are not getting a good education. So he takes No Child Left Behind. He scrubs it up a little bit. He renames it. He gives it a new name called Race to the Top. And it's basically the same law. There's one important difference. With No Child Left Behind, if the school districts didn't perform to certain levels on the national tests, they lost funding.
Hmm.
Under Race to the Top, if the school districts didn't perform to certain levels, or those who did perform to certain levels got an incentive. Stick versus carrot. George W. Bush, stick. Barack Obama, carrot. Both were about national standards. And so, guess what? The same teachers' unions that opposed No Child Left Behind then came around and opposed Race to the Top. So, what do we learn from this? Well, we learn that sometimes a Democratic president and a Republican president can propose the same exact law. They change the name. It does basically the same thing, and they inherit the same enemies. And so now ask me again, like, what? There's not two parties in this country? Not on that issue, not on that issue, not on immigration, not on trade, not on COVID, oftentimes not on tax cuts. There is on abortion. Okay, yeah, on abortion, the parties still fight, but many other issues, not so much.
Wow, that's crazy. What traits do you think are needed in someone who is going to run the country in this day and age?
I said courage, courage, the bravery to be able to stand up against your party, to say things that are unpopular, to say things clearly, even if they offend people. One of the things that worries me about your generation
Hmm.
is because you grew up in cancel culture, you end up with a lot of smart people who are afraid to express themselves.
Definitely.
They're very careful about what they say. They're very politically correct and woke about what they say. And they're not at all like my generation of X. My generation X, people now in our 50s, we were an irreverent bunch, and we're always fighting with somebody, insulting somebody, and getting in somebody's face. Gen Z is a lot more polite. And so I think that courage is a really important trait for leadership. It's probably my favorite trait, my favorite characteristic, and it's in really short supply.
A generation of people pleasers, it sounds like.
Yeah, people pleasers and actually people non-offenders. Like I can't say anything offensive. I could lose my job, or
Oh,
I
wow.
could get in trouble with the boss if I say the wrong thing. So
Yes, I know that a lot of people in the US are sensitive compared to other countries.
a lot of people on college campuses, I think in your average political science class, God bless them, there are students in class who completely disagree with the professor, but they're keeping their mouth shut.
Hmm.
They're like, I don't want to, I need a good grade in this class. I'm not going to challenge the professor. The idea somehow that you'd be challenging the professor is just foreign to this generation, but it was, pretty standard operating procedure for my generation. It's what we did.
Yeah, I've had friends who challenged the professor in their essays and then got low grades. So
No,
it's
it's too
important.
bad.
Mhm.
Yeah. They probably need better professors, you know.
Definitely. They need to be paid more for sure.
Mm.
What do you think? This question is going to be hard to answer, but what do you think the US would look like after 4 years of Kamala's administration or 4 years of Trump's?
Um, you know what? In one regard, I think we're going to end
Mhm.
up at the same place,
Okay.
regardless of who's elected, because you end up with 45% of the country, 45% for Harris, 45% for Trump, even Steven, separated by like razor's edge. This is a tie. You basically have a tie. 3 weeks before the election, you have a tie.
Wow.
The other 10% undecided. So if Trump wins, you're going to have 45% of the country really ticked off. Let's say ballpark about 80 million votes. Joe Biden got elected with 80 million votes. So let's
Hmm.
say you have 80 million Americans who are ticked off if Harris wins, 80 million who are ticked off if Trump wins. Um, each side is going to think the other side cheated because
Definitely.
they're in their own bubble. And all the Trump people say it's impossible that she won. I don't know a single person in my circle, friends who supports Harris. And then I have my Harris people who say I don't have a single person in my circle of friends who supports Trump. So they're both going to say, that it, I was cheated. If I lose, I was cheated. So I think that part's going to be the same. In terms of the other things, it's hard to know what will happen to the economy or how much more divided we'll become or what will happen to our immigration policy or all those things. That's pretty much up in the air. It is very possible, though, that if you want immigration hardliner, vote for Kamala Harris because I think that Harris will be ultimately, if she's elected president, I
Hmm.
think she will be the most heavy-handed enforcer of immigration laws we've ever seen
Oh, wow.
because she'll feel like she has something to prove. She's the daughter of immigrants. Both my parents were born in the United States, even though I'm a Mexican American. Both of her parents were born outside the United States, one in India, one in Jamaica.
Oh, wow.
So,
I didn't know that.
so as the daughter of immigrants, I think she's going to come into office having to prove that she is, American first and can crack down on immigrants. And I think you're already seeing that. And I think she'll be very bad for the immigration community.
Wow. That's surprising. That's not what people have been saying.
Yeah, yeah. And I think they can't see that. I don't. One thing that might help them see things more clearly, if they thought about Hillary Clinton being elected in 2016,
Hmm.
and if Hillary Clinton had as the nation's first woman president, if she had faced a foreign policy crisis, the question is to people, well, do you suppose she would be softer than the men or harder than the men? Well, the answer is she would be harder than the men because she would be perceived as being soft and she would feel she had to prove herself. And so
Oh, so it's a
when
paradox.
you're yeah, when you're a loudmouth Republican like Trump, you don't feel like I've got to be tough to prove myself.
Hmm.
His whole persona is about being tough, right? I don't think he does what he says he's going to do. I think it's just talk and he doesn't follow through. But um, but with Hillary, or in this case with Kamala Harris, I think she will feel a lot of pressure to show just how, strong she can be on the border, and that will lead to some very interesting decisions.
Wow. I heard about Trump having a Project 2025. I'm
Mhm.
not sure if that's actually true or if it's rumored. I know that he denied it. Do you know anything about that or?
I do.
Mhm.
I know quite a little bit. So Project 2025,
Hmm.
something that was created by a conservative think tank in Washington, D.C. called the Heritage Foundation. That's several clicks to the right of a lot of us. And I would say even at several clicks to the right of where Donald Trump is.
Wow.
And it was created as a blueprint, as a document. If we ever get to power again, this is what we should do and call for it to be done. A lot of the people who were involved in Project 2025 and the writing of it were former Trump people. So that's part of the evidence. And the forward to 2025 was written by J.D. Vance, none other than the vice presidential nominee.
Hmm.
So a lot of people doubt Trump when he says, I don't know anything about it, because if he didn't have a hand in it, the people around him certainly had a hand in it. Um, but the wrinkle is no matter how abhorrent parts of Project 2025 are with regard to women, people of color, people who we might consider on the margins, um, Trump has proven over and over again that he's his own person. He doesn't take direction. The idea somehow that they're going to create a blueprint and then give it to him, he's going to follow it like a script. That's not Trump. That wasn't Trump ever. That wasn't Trump in the first term. So I think a lot of the angst that people feel about 2025 is unnecessary. I think it's overwrought. I don't think it's something for them to worry about as much as they should, or as much as they do. Um, because Trump's not going to be taking direction. Trump's going to do what he wants to do. And I think the people who want him to follow this blueprint are going to be very disappointed when he doesn't.
Hmm.
Also, I got to say one more thing. I mean, Democrats just are not very good at this stuff. And if they had a better record to run on, they wouldn't have to mention Project 2025 so much. They mention Project 2025 or, Trump's threat of mass deportations, all these things that Trump has said that make him unqualified to be president and disqualify him. If you had more to say about yourself, you wouldn't have to beat up on Trump so much. And I think Democrats either they don't know what they believe in anymore because it's just kind of mushy, because they've given up so much ground. Barack Obama says to George Bush, "I'm going to take your education plan." Joe Biden says to Donald Trump, "I'm going to take your immigration plan." So the Democrats are kind of lost in the woods. They don't really know who they are anymore. And so when they get a chance to speak into a microphone, they say Trump, 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 and they beat up on Trump. I'm all for that. Okay, if you want to beat up on Trump, I've written hundreds of columns criticizing Trump. I'm all for it. But I also understand, the game here, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, when are you going to get around to telling us what's good about you? You told us why we shouldn't vote for Trump, Project 2025. Now tell me why I should vote for you. And then there's just crickets. Nothing happens.
So it's basically shifting the focus from Trump to like actually making policies better in the Democratic
Yeah.
Party.
And Republicans do the same thing. And Trump would much rather try to scare people away from Harris
Hmm.
to and to make sense out of the hash that he has.
Wow, this is very complicated.
Mm.
This next question is interesting. Is there a risk of a world war or a civil war we should watch out for? How can this be prevented?
Yes, both.
Hmm.
Both. Um, a civil war because you have this divided country, at least a civil war, little c. I don't think we're ever to a point of armed conflict. I
Okay.
may be a minority view on that, but certainly much more alienation from one another, much more division, much more of a sense that somehow only I care about the country, my neighbor's against, I'm the patriot, my neighbor isn't. That kind of civil war. We're not going to play well with each other,
Hmm.
fist fight, storming of the Capitol. You're going to see a lot more turmoil. And for me, I see like the storming of the Capitol on January 6th, and then I turn around and I see the protests after Trump was first elected, all the women who marched on Washington, and Madonna and others saying, I have dreams of blowing up the White House. So I deal with the crazy left and the crazy right all day long. And I think that Civil War possibility is defined that way. People just not talking to each other anymore and that kind of division. And then World War III just quickly on international level. Hey, it's a very dangerous world. I mean, if you pay attention, and we should all be paying more attention to foreign affairs, if you pay attention to what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, one of the big problems is this alliance between four bad countries, two of whom, no, three of whom have nuclear weapons, and it may soon be four. Russia, China, North Korea all have nuclear weapons, and Iran, which may or may not have a nuke. I'm afraid we're going to find out. So those four, that alliance, that ugly alliance of those four, the new axis of evil, that's very, very troublesome. And you need NATO, and you need, lots of force brought to bear to back them down and keep them in check. Because if you want World War III, that's going to be the center of it right there, those four countries.
Which candidate do you think might be better in terms of preventing those types of conflicts, Civil War and World War III?
So that's a tough question because my first instinct is to say Trump would be,
Hmm.
because Trump projects strength. But what we've learned is that Trump projects strength for Trump, um,
Yeah.
and and to advance his own goals, but not necessarily, to protect the country. I think he proved that on January 6th, but he also proved it with regard to NATO. So
Hmm.
so if we have this alliance, these four countries teaming up against us, against Israel, against Great Britain, against us, we need to have NATO. We need to have the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We need to have this tremendous resource that was created after World War II, of all these like-minded countries. And the very fact that Trump talked about pulling out of NATO,
Oh my goodness.
wanted those countries to pay both their fair share or threaten to pull out of NATO. A lot of people, when Russia invaded Ukraine, were grateful that Joe Biden was in the White House and not Donald Trump, because if Trump had succeeded in pulling out of NATO, where does that leave you? Who challenges Russia if not NATO? So it's a bit of a mixed bag, right? So Trump is a strong guy. So we think, okay, maybe that's the guy you want. But he's also somebody who has been reckless with these really important international alliances that we need now more than ever.
Yeah,
So he's
that's
a,
incredibly important because right
he's a mixed
now,
bag.
hmm
He's a mixed bag. With regard to Harris, she is, much more of a question mark. As I said, she will probably feel inclined to be so much more tougher to prove that she's tough, but probably has much less experience and expertise. She'd
hmm
have to rely a lot more on her generals and her Secretary of Defense for this kind of stuff. But when I say she's not ready, I think she's not ready to be president. That becomes really clear when you're talking about foreign policy. I'm not so worried that she's not ready to, run social policy. I'm really worried that she's not ready to run foreign policy.
So
They're the
both
state.
of them are a mixed bag.
Yeah, I would give them both C's, C minus.
Is one slightly better? I mean, pulling out of NATO is horrible. I know that there's like a Simpsons prediction that Trump won and there was World War III, but I'm hoping that it's not true.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the Simpsons call that. It was interesting how they saw that coming after
Yeah,
that Trump would be president.
but we'll see. Like, not all of the predictions came true. So, but yeah, it's difficult to know what's good for the entire world, like what benefits everyone, not just specific groups of people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the entire world is dealing with war, with
Mhm.
refugees, with obviously hunger and poverty and drought and so many people leaving desperate situations to come to the United States or elsewhere. They're on the move. So there's a lot going on.
Mhm.
And a lot of it has to do with war, with issues of war and peace and where, where people go when their country is in upheaval.
Mhm. Yeah. I guess my mom had this question, so I wrote it down. Which candidate do you believe is more respected globally by world leaders?
That's a good question. Not Trump. Not Trump. I think the NATO thing really hurt him.
Hmm.
I think that most countries don't respect him. Most leaders of most countries don't respect him. Um, Even countries he thinks might respect him. I don't think they don't respect him in China or Russia or North Korea. But Harris is not particularly well known or respected either. I
Hmm.
think you might say that Harris is more of a work in progress.
Okay.
So she may have more hope. There may be more hope for her to gain some respect. Trump would have to do a lot of correction and convince people in his second term, hey, it's not going to be like the first term.
Definitely. And who knows if that would actually
Who
happen.
knows if he's capable of that?
Mhm.
So we don't know. But it's a very good question, and the jury is still out with regard to Harris, and the world has already voted with regard to Trump, and they don't trust him.
I remember I was in Spain before Trump's first election. I think he was like he was running for president and everyone was laughing like what's happening in the US? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
And then I know that Kennedy joined Trump's administration, so my next question is about him. Do you believe Kennedy will be able to make America healthy again, as he claims, or would Kamala's administration be better suited for that?
Um, I don't know ultimately what Harris wants to do or would do
Mhm.
with regard to health policy. A lot of it would have to do with who she chooses as the head of Health and Human Services, that department, or a Surgeon General to lead kind of that national discussion about our health. But Robert Kennedy, even though he's signed up with the Trump campaign, I think he's done himself a lot of harm and ultimately will not be. Uh, I don't think he'll make it to a Trump administration cabinet,
Oh,
um,
really?
or even as an advisor. I don't think he'll make it. Yeah, I think it's just his campaign fell apart. Most recently with the scandal involving the journalist. I think
What was the scandal about? I haven't heard about.
he's married and he had a relationship with a journalist who was covering him, who's
Oh
like
my
half
goodness.
half his age, and ultimately I think this came to light, but it's complicated because it's a journalist and a elected official or someone who's running for office. But ultimately Trump will probably decide it's not worth it to have Kennedy involved.
Oh, so that means it wouldn't act like he wouldn't. He claimed to ban GMOs and all of this stuff, and I don't think that's gonna.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think he'll make it into a final administration. So
Okay.
I could be wrong about that, but I don't think Trump needs Bobby Kennedy
Mm-mm.
anymore, if ever he did.
Is there anything else you would like to share about the election or about politics or any messages to the viewers?
One last thought. I think It's important to vote. Everybody talks about that, but it's really important to know what you're voting for.
Hmm.
Homework, to watch politicians, watch what they do, not just what they say. Do your homework, take in information from lots of different sources, ask questions, think critically. Try to look at every issue from different points of view. Avoid the silo of the right or the left. If I've tried to straddle the middle. I find the error is clearer in the middle and in the center. Um, but yeah, just be a very careful consumer of news and ultimately, yeah, show up and vote. But when you show up and vote, know what you're voting for and who you're voting for because you've done your homework beforehand.
Definitely. Everyone go vote. Go vote. I have one quote to read before ending the interview
Yeah,
by Lao Tzu. If there is to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the nations. If there is to be peace in the nations, there must be peace in the cities. If there is to be peace in the cities, there must be peace between neighbors. If there is to be peace between neighbors, there must be peace in the home. If there is to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart.
very good. Very good. So peace to you.
Peace to you.
Peace to you.
Thank you so much for answering my questions. I have a lot more clarity about the election now. So,
Good. Thank you very much. My pleasure. Look forward to doing it. Let's talk again after the election and see how it went.
yes, definitely. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.